There's a new study out there that shows that most couples lie to each other at some time or another, and it's usually about a money issue.
And whether it is about savings or being in debt, well, the lies can certainly come to the surface and hurt that relationship. Carol Joynt explores the topic in her new book, Innocent Spouse, The Road from Desperation to Recovery. Carol is well known here in Washington. She's an Emmy-winning producer and the author of this moving memoir. Carol joins us. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you, Melanie, Natasha.
Now, so this book
here
details. Yeah, thank you.
They don't know.
The stuff that happens behind the scenes. We should just fill them in. You knew that you were coming on the show, just
at some
not
point.
Which day, right? So today, where's Carol? Where's Carol? Thank goodness you just live over the Key Bridge.
And there was no traffic.
And you zipped on over.
For
and
once,
I found
right?
parking
We
right in
appreciate
front.
it,
So,
yeah.
and I'm happy to be here.
You should get a lottery ticket after this. No
Maybe
traffic
a winning
across
one.
the Key Bridge and parking outside of our building, right? This is a good day.
I keep trying, believe
You know what?
me.
It's because you've learned so many lessons in your hard times.
You just
You're
go.
just a survivor. You get there, right?
You just do it.
So your book really details your life after your husband passed away and left you $3 million in debt. Little did you know.
Among many other things.
Yeah.
He, a surprise federal tax fraud debt and a bankrupt saloon and a 5-year-old son. Now, the 5-year-old son I was perfectly happy to have with me, but the fraud debt and the bankrupt saloon I could have done without.
When this happened, when you realized where the state of your finances were you ready to talk about it, or did you keep it kind of hidden for a second?
I talked about it.
I would think you'd be a little embarrassed.
I guess I'm not made that way. It was beyond embarrassment because the shock was so profound and so shattering. I found out 2 weeks after he died. I knew he was being audited. He owned a bar and restaurant in Georgetown, Nathan's, which was very well known, and I was accustomed to him being audited. And he had just said to me one night at dinner, "This audit's a little bad, but the lawyers say I can't talk to you about it." And no other discussion was made. But 2 weeks after he died, they asked me to come in and see them, and that's when they gave me the bad news. So I was dealing not only with my grief, but now I also had this debt, to which I said to them, I can't possibly afford this. We don't have this kind of money. I don't know what Howard did. I don't know how he did it, what he did, why. I had nothing to do with it.
But because you're married, and what's his is yours.
Because I was in the will as his sole heir, and because I had signed our joint marital tax return, I was now the defendant legally. I was liable. And that's the way the law works. And that was news to me too, because you go and do your last will with your spouse, and it just seems like something you have to do, and you leave everything to each other. And it never occurred to me at that moment of doing the will to say, what is my liability here if you die? Should this will be written in such a way that I'm protected? Now, when I redid my will after Howard died, I made sure my son was protected in every possible way.
Wow.
Smart.
You learned a lot, didn't you?
Well, I learned that, and I also learned when you do your tax return to know who you have do it. We did have an accountant, but he was sort of relying on Howard a little too much. And maybe in some situations where you're married, maybe you shouldn't have a joint return. Maybe if your spouse has a small business maybe you might want to say, I think I want to do my own tax return.
Keep this separate.
Well, I mean, doesn't mean you don't love each other, but financial transparency is something a lot of marriages don't have.
Finances are huge, and I think a lot of people just turn a blind eye to it, or just have that trust and think it's okay.
Ignorance can be bliss sometimes, and in my case, because everybody says to me, but you were a journalist, you were in the business of asking questions, and that's absolutely true. But that was my work. I went home, and I loved being married to a man who wasn't phobic about math. I was, who liked handling the finances. And, I never felt like I was involved in his world. I never worked in the restaurant or any restaurant. I had my own credit cards. I had my own bank account. I had my own income.
Work and personal, totally different.
So it just wasn't on your radar.
It wasn't. I didn't want it to be.
Yeah.
No, it was stupid. But I was, as I said, ignorance was bliss. I liked having my head in the sand on those issues. Life was good.
Now, you loved your husband, Harold.
Very much.
Since his death, and since you learned about the big debt, in addition to that, there were some other secrets that came out.
All kinds of little lies which ironically ended up helping my defense for innocent spouse. For example, I thought I was his third wife, but I found out from his sister that I was actually his fourth wife.
Oh my God! How do you deal? First off, before the next one, how do you even deal with that?
Natasha, by the time I found out, I was so mired in my battle with the IRS. I was like, oh, thank you, because it was one more piece of evidence that there was a pattern of my not being completely involved
that could help you
in his life.
But the anger that you must have, I mean, to someone that's
no
passed
longer.
on. I mean, but how did you, the anger that built between the finances and the lies, you know, everything's piling on top of you. How do you get through anger at someone that you can't go and, you know, tear apart because they're dead?
That's such a good point, because initially that was my reaction. People would say, you must be furious, and I was like, I'm at war with the IRS. I don't have time to be angry with a dead man. But after I settled with the IRS, and they were fair to me, as I couldn't get out of Nathan's, I couldn't give it away. The landlords wouldn't take back the keys. It couldn't afford itself. It was draining me like it was Count Dracula. And as I got deeply and more deeply and more deeply buried by Nathan's, my anger became more to the fore, because the Nathan's morass was so awful. And I was like, Howard, how could you leave me this mess? And I would say that I went from suppressing my anger to my anger rising to the surface, and I found myself actually taking it out on my teenage son.
Aww.
Well, we worked that out. But then by the end, when I closed Nathan's, I was able to make peace with so much.
And speaking of the property of Nathan's, it's going to be turned into Serendipity.
An ice cream parlor.
Yeah, like the Serendipity chain up in New York City. I think it's supposed to have an opening this week. Will you go there? Will you go there under the Serendipity name?
People seem to think I own the building and that I'm involved somehow, but I'm not involved.
You've washed your hands of that one.
Well, would you go in there? It must feel weird to know that there's going to be a different name on there.
That building is so full of jumbies that no.
And memories that are not particularly good ones.
I mean, all the ghosts through there, and they can stay there as far as I'm concerned.
You're done. You're done.
It's like, you know, I love Serendipity in New York, and Spencer and I, my son, have gone many, many times, and I wish they'd opened any place else.
Well, it'd be good to get a business in that location.
Well, that was, you know, one of the things about writing the book was that I kept wanting to say what happened, and the place wouldn't open and wouldn't open and wouldn't open and wouldn't open. So finally the book had to go to press, and I couldn't say what happened to it.
Well, the Q&A cafe that you ran inside Nathan's, this still lives on, though, right?
I lifted it off the sinking ship and took it over to the Ritz in Georgetown. And we have one more coming up in June before our summer hiatus. And that is going to be a Q&A with me.
Oh,
yeah.
great.
Well, John Donovan of ABC is going to interview me about...
Turn the tables on you.
Yes. Well, I might ask him a few questions, too.
Carol, you seem to get so many good people. People here in D.C. that people really want to hear about. Newsmakers, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Which is good in the journalism field.
That's what it's all about.
But who else do you want to get and you haven't been able to get your hands on to talk to?
Well, it seems that eventually I get everybody, and I found that back when I was booking Larry King and Charlie Rose, that eventually you get everybody, because I wanted to get David Rubenstein, the guy who created the Carlyle Group, for years, and it just seemed like it would never happen. And he was my last interview a couple months ago. And then, well, Eric Ripert, the French chef, you know, I thought,
you think you just wear him down?
Well, you wait for something. Some things happen when they're meant to happen. You just keep trying.
And what about your work as a producer for television network? You think you'll be resurrecting that career at some point?
You tell me what networks hire 60-year-old women, and I will apply there.
Nobody wants to pay for your great experience. That's the problem. That's the problem these days.
I'm an optimist. I don't know what's going to happen to me, but as soon as I'm done pimping the book, my field is open, and I'm ready for something.
Well, you know, I don't know if Arch told you this. Arch Campbell was on the top of the show today, and he said, I read it from cover to cover. I couldn't put it down. Look at that endorsement. And Arch doesn't read.
Right. And men are loving it. Men are loving it. But in the service of pimping, I should say, I think it is the best beach read. So since beach season is coming up, get Innocent Spouse.
So you have a book signing coming up?
I have one Wednesday evening at the City Tavern Club in Georgetown. Okay. And it's cash bar. And my website, caroljoynt.com, has all my appearances.
Oh, the other calendar of
Yeah.
events.
It's so good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carol.
It's good
You're
to see
doing
you
well,
both.
too.
Next up on the show, will you be, speaking of the beach, the belle of the beach? We're going to take a look at how you can bring style to the sand.
Plus, could Charlie Sheen have found a new deal? Oh, we're going to tell you where you could be seeing his face.